I thought keeping quiet would protect me, but all it did was let them twist my life into something unrecognizable. I don't know if I'm the villain or the victim anymore. All I know is it's too late to undo. Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day. I manage $500 million in education grants. And instead of just showing up with a clipboard and watching schools put on some fake performance for funders, I always go in quietly undercover. Because I want to see the truth. The real culture. The way families are actually treated when they don't think money's in the room. But let me tell you, nothing prepared me for what I walked into at my daughter's school. Lincoln Elementary. Their PTA board meeting. The place parents had already warned me about. They said, watch out for the president. She'll chew up a single dad like you and spit you out. I thought they were exaggerating. Spoiler alert, they weren't. I showed up in my usual clothes, khakis from Target with a coffee stain on the leg. And right away, the PTA president blocked the door with her shiny designer bag like she was guarding a VIP lounge. She gave me this once over and said, this meeting is about complicated financial matters. Translation, you don't belong here. I tried to slip past anyway, but she literally stepped sideways to block me again. Meanwhile, the rest of the board sat around the conference table like a matching set. Starbucks cups, perfectly color-coded binders, they looked like they were about to film a commercial for exclusive PTA memberships only. When I reached for the stack of budget papers, the vice president actually slid them out of my reach like I was some kid trying to sneak cookies before dinner. My jaw locked. The treasurer shook her head at the secretary and mouthed, he just doesn't get it. Finally, the president let me through the door, but the only empty chair had purses piled on it like a barricade. No one even thought about moving them. So I stood awkwardly against the wall like some unwanted intruder. Out the window, I caught one of them taking photos of my Toyota Corolla, parked between their BMWs and Mercedes. Classy. Then came the first strike. The treasurer announced, your apartment isn't even in the right school zone. As if my zip code defined my worth. The secretary immediately followed it up by demanding a $500 emergency assessment fee due today. She even whipped out a card reader and held it in front of me like I was about to buy Girl Scout cookies. I forced myself to breathe slowly, but my blood was boiling. The president wrinkled her nose at my cheap khakis and muttered something about standards. The vice president chimed in, this is really more of a mom thing, as they literally turned their backs to me to form a circle. When I tried walking around to the other side to look at the grant papers, the president put her hand on my chest and pushed me back. Not hard, but enough to make it crystal clear, stay in your place. And the irony? This was the same woman probably teaching her kids about respecting boundaries. Then came the line that nearly made me see red. The treasurer looked me dead in the eye and said, foundations want families who look good in photos. Wholesome, American families. Like us. The secretary added something about cultural fit, her eyes lingering a little too long on my skin. And the president? She suggested maybe I'd feel more comfortable at the maintenance staff meeting with Miguel and the others. Miguel. The same man whose son I had personally just signed off on for a full scholarship. But then they went after my daughter. My little girl, Emma. The president pulled up photos from the school pickup line, zooming in on Emma's mismatched socks, and passed her phone around for everyone to laugh at. The treasurer showed off a picture she'd taken of Emma's lunchbox, mocking the Ziploc bag sandwiches because they weren't Instagram-worthy bento boxes. No wonder Emma struggles without a mother's touch, she announced. I bit down so hard I tasted blood. Without asking, the treasurer grabbed Emma's backpack, dumped it across the polished table, and picked through her things like evidence at a crime scene. Homework folders, pencils, snacks, all laid out while the others shook their heads in judgment. Then they handed me brochures about children of divorce and neglect warning signs. The vice president even snatched up my phone and asked why I didn't have parental monitoring apps installed. She was swiping through my home screen when I yanked it back. And then the president pulled up crime statistics about children of single parents, turned her laptop toward me, and with a smug little smile said, that's why we need this grant money intervention programs. For kids like yours. My straight-A daughter. Intervention. And as if that wasn't enough, they dragged another parent in from the hallway to show off Emma's snack, a gas station honey bun. Look at this, the president said. This is what he feeds her. Every word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My vision blurred. My fists clenched. And just when I thought I might snap, the conference room door slammed open. Principal Matthews rushed in, out of breath. Mr. Hernandez, I'm so sorry I'm late for our meeting about the grant review. She froze when she saw the scene, Emma's belongings scattered across the table, me shoved against the wall, and the PTA board acting like the mean girls of a bad high school movie. Her face went pale. Oh no, she whispered. Then louder, from the Morrison Foundation. Mr. Hernandez is the one who decides which schools get the $500,000 STEM grant. The silence was deafening. The president, the one who'd pushed me, stumbled backward. Someone whispered, he decides. The color drained from every face in the room. The vice president dropped her binder, papers scattering everywhere. The treasurer's laptop nearly slipped from her hands. The secretary fumbled with her card reader, shoving it into her purse like it was a weapon she wasn't supposed to be caught holding. And me? I just stood there, watching. Principal Matthews quickly gathered Emma's scattered belongings with trembling hands, zipped them back into the backpack, and handed it to me like it was something sacred. The PTA president finally found her voice, though it cracked. Mr. Hernandez, we had no idea. She smoothed down her designer dress and nearly knocked over her coffee cup trying to look composed. The others scrambled, each one suddenly desperate to look professional. Please, Mr. Hernandez, sit, the president said, moving her bag from the chair like it was an offering. We were just about to go over the grant application. The treasurer reopened her laptop, sweat beading down her forehead, babbling about financial transparency. The secretary shoved achievement certificates and test scores across the table, her hands shaking so badly that half of them fell to the floor. The vice president scrambled to help her pick them up, both of them crouching awkwardly in their pencil skirts. Principal Matthews stood firmly between me and the board, her voice calm but carrying weight. Mr. Hernandez has been observing our school culture for the past week. He's very thorough. That warning wasn't lost on them. The president forced a wide, painful smile. Of course. We welcome thorough assessments. We were just discussing how to better serve all families. She looked around for backup, and the others nodded like bobbleheads. The treasurer pulled up a slide titled Diversity and Inclusion. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. I shifted Emma's backpack on my shoulder, their eyes drilling into me, waiting for me to respond. The secretary slid the parenting brochures off the table as quietly as possible. The vice president stacked her papers with surgical precision, aligning each edge like her life depended on it. And for the first time in that entire meeting, I was the one in control. Actually, Principal Matthews cut in, her voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the tension. Mr. Hernandez and I need to continue our tour of the facilities. We're on a very tight schedule. She moved toward the door, clearly expecting me to follow. The PTA president practically leapt out of her chair. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she hurried after us. Oh, but surely Mr. Hernandez would like to hear about our wonderful programs. We have so many innovative ideas for that STEM grant money. The desperation in her tone made it sound less like a pitch and more like a plea. The treasurer scrambled up too, hugging her laptop to her chest like it was a lifeline. Yes. We've already drafted a preliminary budget. Every single penny would go directly to benefit the students, especially those from diverse backgrounds. She tripped over the word diverse like it had suddenly become foreign to her tongue. The secretary and vice president weren't far behind, flanking the others until they'd formed this human wall between me and the door. Their Starbucks cups, once their proud little status symbols, sat sweating and forgotten on the table, puddles of condensation spreading across the wood. Principal Matthews didn't miss a beat. She glanced at her watch and said firmly, second grade science block begins in 10 minutes. Mr. Hernandez specifically requested to observe authentic classroom experiences. Then she opened the door wide and held it there. I walked out, feeling every pair of PTA eyes drilling into my back like lasers. But of course the president couldn't let it go. Her heels clicked rapidly as she chased us down the hall. Mr. Hernandez, please, if we could just have 5 more minutes to explain our vision. The rest of her crew piled out too, crowding behind her like a flock of overdressed geese. The treasurer called after me, we have letters of support from prominent community members. The secretary chimed in quickly, and testimonials. From families who absolutely love this school. Funny how none of this came up before I had Morrison Foundation attached to my name. Principal Matthews didn't even look back. She just kept striding down the hall, her heels sharp and steady against the tile. Behind us, voices rose, sharp whispers, chairs scraping, the sounds of a united front crumbling as those women turned on each other. Finally, when we rounded the corner and were clear of them, Matthews slowed her pace. She glanced behind us to make sure the coast was clear, then exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for hours. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and I saw the exhaustion underneath. We walked past walls plastered with student artwork, paper butterflies, hand-traced turkeys, crooked little pumpkins. Each carefully labeled with a child's name. My chest tightened when I spotted Emma's solar system project, a cut-and-paste lineup of planets she'd carefully glued in order. Matthews paused at a classroom window, watching for a second as kids recited multiplication tables in unison, their teacher's voice warm and encouraging. Then we moved on, passing the library where parent volunteers were shelving books. They looked up, curiosity etched on their faces. I could almost hear the whispers forming the moment we walked past. In a quieter wing, trophy cases lined the hall, filled with academic awards and science fair ribbons. Matthews finally stopped at a bench beneath a bulletin board of fall festival photos. Her voice dropped low. Mr. Hernandez, I need you to know, those women don't represent the heart of our school. Our teachers, our families, they fight every day with what little we have. I set Emma's backpack on the bench, glancing out the window at the playground. Kindergartners shrieked happily as they swung and climbed. Their laughter was the exact opposite of the toxic nonsense I just escaped. Matthews pulled out her phone and scrolled. I've been documenting complaints about the PDA's exclusionary practices for months. Parents have raised concerns but, she shook her head. Before I could reply, the bell rang. Doors swung open and kids spilled into the hall in neat lines, shepherded by their teachers. I spotted Emma's class heading toward the cafeteria. She was chatting animatedly with her best friend Maria, waving her hands around to make her story bigger. Her socks, one striped, one polka-dotted, peeked out from under her jeans. The sight made my throat tighten. Matthews caught my gaze. Mrs. Fuller, Emma's teacher, asked to speak with you. She's been worried about certain incidents. Her careful tone made it clear she wasn't talking about academics. We passed a group of volunteer moms. They slowed when they saw me, trading pointed looks before one whispered to another, earning a dramatic gasp. Of course. In schools, gossip travels faster than the morning announcements. Matthew's phone buzzed. Her eyes darkened when she read the screen. The PDA president's already blasting emails to the district office. She's calling it a misunderstanding and demanding an emergency meeting. She showed me the screen. Through the cafeteria window I saw Emma sit down, pull out her sandwich from its little Ziploc bag without a care in the world. Maria handed her apple slices. Emma grinned and traded half her honey bun. Then, heels clicking, the vice president appeared around the corner, pretending to study student poetry on the wall while sneaking glances at us. Matthews lifted her chin. Let's continue this in my office. We'll review the actual grant application there. She emphasized actual just loud enough for the vice president to hear. As we walked away I heard frantic tapping behind us, rapid-fire texting. The main office was buzzing when we entered. Phones ringing, kids signing in and out, the nurse bandaging a scraped knee. The secretary looked up, spotted the vice president tailing us, and without a word cranked up the radio until classical music filled the space. Subtle but effective. Inside Matthew's office the chaos melted away. Student artwork covered one wall and a reading chair sagged in the corner, clearly well-loved. She gestured for me to sit. The Morrison Foundation could transform our STEM program, she said, pulling out a binder, nothing like the PDA's manicured props. This one was bursting with sticky notes crammed with receipts and photos. She flipped it open to a picture of their science lab, ancient microscopes on chipped tables, a curling periodic table poster barely hanging on. The computer lab? Even worse, machines that belonged in a museum. Our teachers even spent their own money this year for supplies, she continued, sliding receipts my way. Meanwhile, the PDA spent funds on a new coffee machine for their meeting room. Through the office window I spotted the vice president loitering near the secretary's desk, obviously trying to eavesdrop. The secretary countered by humming along with the radio, turning the volume even higher. Matthew's phone rang again. PDA president. Then again. And again. She finally silenced it, shaking her head. They're panicking. They've had total control over funding for years. It's been their little kingdom. She pulled out a confidential folder. Inside were emails and minutes from past meetings. My stomach twisted as I read. Fundraiser money funneled into vanity projects, closets stocked with unused supplies kept locked, teacher requests denied while the PDA lounge got a renovation. A knock at the door interrupted us. The school secretary poked her head in. Principal Matthews, urgent call from the superintendent. Also, the PDA president is demanding to speak with you both. Through the glass I saw her pacing, barking into her phone, gesturing wildly. The treasurer and secretary flanked her, typing furiously. Matthews straightened. Tell the superintendent I'll call back in 30 minutes. And tell the PDA president I'm in a closed-door meeting that cannot be interrupted. The secretary nodded, shutting the door behind her. The muffled shouting outside made it clear the PDA president did not take that well. I thought about Emma. Sitting in the cafeteria. Trading snacks like it was the most important business deal of her life. She had no idea her mismatched socks and Ziploc sandwiches had been dissected and mocked. Matthews seemed to read my mind. She pulled out a folder decorated with star stickers. Emma is a remarkable student. Her teachers rave about her kindness and creativity. But lately, she's been asking why she doesn't have a mom to pack pretty lunches like the other kids. I clenched my hands in my lap. Another knock. Louder. Principal Matthews, the secretary called. I'm so sorry, but the superintendent is demanding you take the call now. The PDA president's threatening to escalate this to the school board. Matthews looked at me steadily. Mr. Hernandez, I know you have a process. But this school is more than those 4 women with their designer purses. It's parents working double shifts. Teachers spending their own money. Kids like Emma who deserve everything we can give them. She smoothed her skirt and rose. I need to take this call. Please go see our classrooms. Talk to our teachers. See the real Lincoln Elementary. And just like that, the phone rang again. The superintendent's direct line flashed on the display. Through the office window I saw the PDA president gathering backup, other parents now crowding the front desk. It was turning into a full-blown spectacle. Honestly, at this point, Principal Matthews deserved hazard pay. Those trophy cases outside weren't the real prize. The drama happening in real time put them all to shame. As Matthews answered the call, I stepped into the hall. The president spotted me instantly and swooped in, heels hammering the linoleum. The treasurer and secretary flanked her, plastering identical fake friendly smiles on their faces. They surrounded me like a moving wall, steering me away from classrooms. The treasurer shoved spreadsheets at me, the secretary flashed testimonials, and the president leaned in with a perfume cloud thick enough to choke on. I stopped suddenly. They weren't expecting it. The secretary dropped her papers, the treasurer stumbled sideways, and in their scramble I slipped past them toward Mrs. Fuller's classroom. Through the window I saw Emma, hand raised, glowing with excitement as she answered a math question. For a second, everything else faded. Then the president's hand landed on my arm. I looked down at her manicured nails, then up at her forced smile. She dropped her hand quickly, but still tried to talk confidentially about the school's needs. The treasurer chimed in with her laptop, the secretary waved photos like evidence. Mrs. Fuller opened the classroom door, inviting me inside. Emma's face lit up, then dimmed when she noticed the PDA crowding around me. The president blocked the doorway, insisting not to disrupt the class. The treasurer yammered about deadlines. The secretary rattled off texts. Emma's smile faded. She turned back to her desk. The PDA dragged me toward the computer lab instead. Inside, ancient machines coughing to life, duct tape holding panels together. The president tried to steer me toward the 3 newer computers shoved in a corner. The treasurer shoved cost projections in my face, the secretary snapped photos like it was a press event. A group of 5th graders walked in, forced to share machines because only half worked. Their teacher apologized, quietly explaining this was a daily struggle. The PDA hustled me out before I could ask more. In the hallway, I spotted a padlocked supply closet. Through the window, stacks of brand new boxes untouched. Special supplies for advanced programs, the president said quickly. The treasurer nodded, promising to email me distribution records. The secretary physically blocked the door. Convenient. Too convenient. Just then, Principal Matthews reappeared, calm but firm. I'll be continuing Mr. Hernandez's tour personally. The PDA protested, waving agendas and schedules. Matthews didn't flinch. She guided me away while the trio trailed us at a distance, whispering furiously. And for the first time since I'd stepped into that building, I knew exactly who needed this grant least. We headed to the library next, and honestly, the place broke my heart. The shelves sagged under the weight of outdated textbooks, some so old they still listed Pluto as a planet. Mrs. Garcia, the librarian, greeted me with this quiet dignity and handed me her wish list. It wasn't extravagant. Just updated books, fresh materials, things any kid deserves. Meanwhile, in the doorway, the PDA board lurked like vultures. The president kept glancing at her phone, frown lines digging into her forehead. The treasurer's fingers were a blur across her keyboard. And the secretary? She was cycling through calls like she was trading stocks on Wall Street. The art room wasn't any better. Students huddled over scraps, sharing dried-out markers and half-broken crayons. The teacher, bless her, had a whole folder of receipts, proof she'd been buying supplies with her own paycheck. And right on cue, the president appeared beside me, chattering about their arts enrichment program. Except funny thing, I saw no evidence of it, other than her voice. The treasurer flashed photos from last year's art show, while the secretary tossed out vague phrases about corporate sponsorship opportunities. Then we hit the music room. A group of kids sat around a piano with missing keys, making do with an instrument that wheezed more than it sang. In the corner, the PDA board clustered together, whispering so furiously it looked like a coup was being plotted. The president kept darting glances at me. The treasurer showed something on her screen that made the secretary gasp. The second they noticed me watching, they snapped apart, smiling like nothing had happened. By lunchtime, I was starving. I walked into the cafeteria and spotted Emma waving at me from across the room. I waved back and for a moment, just a moment, I forgot the circus outside those doors. But of course the PDA had other plans. The president swooped in, suggesting I should join them in the conference room to discuss the grant over lunch. The treasurer piped up about some fancy meal she'd already ordered from a high-end restaurant. The secretary was halfway down the hall, no doubt preparing their stage. Instead, I sat down at an empty cafeteria table. The lunch ladies spotted me, recognition flashing in their eyes from my earlier visits. They gave me warm smiles, the kind you can't fake. The president reluctantly followed, heels clicking across the linoleum, her designer suit looking ridiculous among the plastic chairs. The treasurer and secretary flanked her like bodyguards, looking more like they'd swallowed lemons than like they wanted to eat lunch. Then Emma walked over, tray in hand. She asked if she could sit with us. And I swear I saw the president's entire expression shift, calculating, predatory. Before I could answer, she leaned in, sugary sweet. Don't you think Emma might be more comfortable with her friends? The treasurer chimed in about professional boundaries. The secretary pointed out an open seat back at Emma's table. Emma's face fell. She nodded quietly and walked back to Maria. My jaw locked as I watched her sit down again, trying to hide the hurt. Right on cue, the president launched into a polished speech about how much good the grant money would do. The treasurer laid out printed projections. The secretary handed me glossy brochures like they'd hired a PR firm. When Matthews found me again, I was still pinned by this little formation of PDA soldiers. Time to visit the special education classrooms, she announced. The president's face drained of color. Oh, they're being cleaned right now. The treasurer quickly backed her up, confidentiality concerns. The secretary muttered something about protocols. Matthews didn't even blink. She marched us straight there. Mr. Rodriguez, the special ed teacher, greeted us with genuine warmth. His classroom looked completely different. Adaptive tools, updated tech, real resources. The PDA hovered in the doorway, glaring. Mr. Rodriguez explained why he'd applied for grants himself. The PDA hadn't given his students a dime in 3 years. The president cut in, voice tight. Funds are distributed based on student numbers. The treasurer rattled on about fiduciary duty. The secretary invoked legal compliance. I wasn't buying it. Later, I spotted Emma's class lining up for recess. My daughter looked tired, dragging her feet a little. But before I could even think about heading toward the playground, the president caught me and rerouted me to the gym. The treasurer started rattling off stats about physical education initiatives. The secretary jumped in with childhood obesity numbers. They boxed me in, steering me away from the one place Emma needed me most. The gym looked rough. Hoops hung crooked, one backboard cracked down the middle. Most of the gear had been donated by parents secondhand. The PE teacher tried to explain, but the PDA shouted over him. Programs, projections, photos, blah blah blah. Back in the main office, the scene had escalated. A crowd of parents waited, summoned by the PDA's frantic texts. They waved signs praising the board, thanking them for their dedication. Several walked right up to me with speeches that sounded painfully rehearsed. The treasurer beamed, smug. The secretary started recording, her phone angled toward me. Matthew's assistant slipped her a note. She frowned, then handed it to me. The district office had already received multiple calls about my visit, all from PDA board members or their friends. The president gasped theatrically. Oh, how surprising. The treasurer clutched her pearls about proper channels. The secretary sighed about transparency protocols. By this point it was obvious they were hiding something. The lock supply closet? The way they physically blocked me from classrooms? The pattern screamed corruption. So I asked to see 3 years of PDA financials. The president's smile froze in place. Of course, she said through her teeth. We'll compile them. The treasurer suddenly discovered a calculation error. The secretary's phone rang urgently. They bolted back to the conference room for yet another emergency meeting. While they schemed, I visited more classrooms. Teachers whispered stories about denied requests, locked away supplies, fundraisers where the money mysteriously evaporated. Many looked over their shoulders, terrified of retaliation. A pattern emerged, ugly, unmistakable. When the PDA emerged, they were armed for war. A projector set up. Chairs arranged theater-style. Parents seated like an audience. The president took the stage, laser pointer in hand. The treasurer worked the slides. The secretary handed out glossy binders. The presentation was slick. Stock photos of smiling kids, budgets with suspiciously low costs, timelines that skipped over all the bureaucracy they'd created. Every question I asked was deflected, delayed, or answered with promises of detailed reports later. The room nodded along, cowed into silence. An hour later, I stood to leave. The president physically blocked the door. The treasurer waved another spreadsheet. The secretary shoved yet another binder into my hands. I brushed past them into the hallway, just in time to see Emma's class returning from recess. She lagged behind the group, her shoulders slumped, her teacher gently guiding her back in line. Her face, God, the hurt on her face, hit me harder than anything that day. The president noticed me watching and pounced. That's why we have anti-bullying initiatives. She chirped. The treasurer shoved stats under my nose. The secretary blurted something about student welfare programs. I ignored them and went straight to Matthew's office. She shut the door firmly behind me. Outside, I could see the PDA pacing, calling, gesturing like frantic actors in a bad soap opera. The secretary even pressed her ear to the wood, straining to hear. Inside, Matthews laid it all out, purchase orders for conference room upgrades while classrooms begged for supplies. Vendor contracts handed to friends of the board at inflated prices. Fundraiser proceeds siphoned into administrative costs. Then came a knock. The counselor walked in with Emma. Her eyes were red, tissue clutched tight. Some girls have been teasing her, the counselor explained gently. Comments about her lunch, her clothes. The ringleader's mother? PDA board. Emma climbed into my lap, something she never did at school. Through the window, I saw the president glaring in at us, typing furiously on her phone. Seconds later, the treasurer and secretary joined her, all three whispering and pointing straight at us. The counselor leaned in. This isn't isolated. Certain kids are excluded from birthday parties, group projects, playdates. It all starts with the parents and it trickles down. Emma's small voice broke me. Dad, can we get fancier lunch boxes? So I can fit in? I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. The counselor reminded her gently, the problem wasn't her sandwich bags. It was them. After Emma left, Matthews and I went through the school's real needs. The list was overwhelming. Textbooks, playground equipment, working computers, basic classroom supplies. All while the PDA hoarded money for themselves. The president didn't even knock the next time. She barged in, dripping false sympathy. We're very concerned about Emma's well-being. Children of single parents often need extra support. The treasurer offered me parenting resources. The secretary chirped about counseling programs. The act was so fake it made my skin crawl. Matthews asked them to leave. They ignored her, babbling over each other about deadlines and reports until the room was chaos. I finally had enough. I stood, walked out, and let their voices trail off behind me. Their heels clattered after me, desperate to keep up. Out in the parking lot, I found a note tucked under my windshield. Be careful who you make enemies of. The president appeared beside me, eyes wide with fake innocence. I saw teenagers hanging around earlier. Must have been them. The treasurer mumbled about vandalism. The secretary offered to review the footage. As I drove off, I glanced in the rear view. They stood in a huddle, phones out, plotting their next move. And that's when I realized, the fight for Lincoln Elementary wasn't just about money. It was about power. And Emma? She was stuck right in the middle of their war. That night, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree, emails from PDA board members and their loyal little entourage. Each one dripping with concern about my assessment process, questioning my qualifications, even hinting that maybe someone else should be handling the grand evaluation. Translation, the smear campaign had officially begun. At dinner, Emma barely touched her food. She just pushed peas around her plate. When I asked about her day, her voice was small. A few classmates had suddenly canceled their playdates. Their moms had called with flimsy excuses about scheduling conflicts. I didn't need a crystal ball to know who was behind it. The board was weaponizing social isolation, using kids as pawns in their power games. That broke me. Emma asked, did I do something wrong? Is that why they don't like me anymore? I wrapped her in my arms and held her until she fell asleep, promising her things would get better, even as fury burned in my chest. Once she was asleep, I went back to my laptop. I laid out every note from my visit. The gap between what I'd seen, the broken crayons, the duct-taped computers, and the glossy dog and pony show the PDA tried to sell me, it was night and day. Their facade was cracking. And I was going to push until it shattered. My phone rang. Principal Matthews. Her voice was fast, tense. The PDA president had called an emergency board meeting for the next morning. They were preparing a formal complaint about my assessment process. The secretary was already drafting a letter to the Morrison Foundation, questioning my objectivity. I thanked Matthews, hung up, and stared out the window. A car crawled down my street, headlights sweeping the front of my apartment building. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was one of them checking where I lived. Desperate people make reckless choices. The next morning came too soon. At drop-off, Emma hugged me tighter than usual, her little fingers gripping my shirt before slipping into the school building. I noticed other parents avoiding my eyes. The whisper campaign was spreading. When I walked into the school, the emergency board meeting was already in full swing. Through the glass, I saw the president at the head of the room, arms waving dramatically. Parents filled the seats, some nodding along, others looking uneasy. The treasurer had her laptop hooked to a projector, slides glowing about proper evaluation procedures. The secretary read from a neat stack of notes, parroting words like transparency and fairness. I opened the door and stepped in without knocking. Silence fell. Heads turned. The president's face flushed crimson before she pasted on a brittle smile. "Mr. Hernandez," she said smoothly, "we were just discussing concerns about your assessment process." The treasurer clicked to the next slide, Morrison Foundation guidelines cherry-picked to make me look sloppy. The secretary's pen hovered, ready to record my response. Parents shifted in their seats, conflicted. I recognized some faces from the staged support rally yesterday, but the enthusiasm was gone. One mom kept glancing between me and the board, chewing her lip. A father fidgeted with his phone, clearly uncomfortable. The president gestured magnanimously. "Would you like to address their concerns?" I didn't sit. I didn't even speak at first. I let the silence press down until the tension was thick enough to choke on. Then, instead of defending myself, I asked one question: "What's in the lock supply closet?" The president blinked. Then recovered. "Special programs," she said with that politician's smile. "Which programs?" I asked. The treasurer chimed in quickly. "Inventory management. Standard practice." "Show me the records," I replied. The secretary clutched her notes. "We'll email them later." "No. No." The room shifted. Parents whispered. A dad raised his hand. "Why are supplies locked away when my daughter's class doesn't even have enough notebooks?" The president silenced him with a glare, but the murmurs grew. I pulled out my phone and held up photos from yesterday. The duct-taped computers. The cracked basketball hoop. The ancient textbooks. Parents craned forward to see. The president scrambled for excuses. The treasurer rattled on about budget constraints. The secretary blamed district policies. None of it landed. Then a voice cut through the noise. A woman I hadn't seen before stood up. She introduced herself as Catherine Fuller, new to the district. Her son's teacher had told her she was buying supplies out of pocket while the PTA funded conference room upgrades. Catherine asked, "Why are teachers draining their own wallets while the board spends money on lattes and renovations?" The president's answer, something about priorities, fell flat. Other parents did too. Stories poured out. Denied requests. Excluded kids. Families shut out because they weren't in the inner circle. The treasurer slammed her laptop shut. The secretary snapped, "Order." The president's smile looked like it might crack her face. And then the vice president stood. Quiet until now, she suddenly pulled out a folder. Emails. Emails between board members. Discussions about hiding expenditures, keeping certain purchases off the books. The room exploded. Parents shouted questions. The treasurer lunged to grab the folder. The secretary froze mid-note. The president turned on her VP like a snake. "Traitor." She hissed, mask slipping. The meeting descended into chaos, years of frustration boiling over all at once. Matthews appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise. She took in the scene with calm satisfaction before raising her voice. Everyone settled down. Slowly, the chaos ebbed. But something had shifted permanently. The board's iron grip was slipping. Parents who'd stayed silent out of fear were demanding answers. The treasurer scrambled to reopen her laptop, trying to clarify financial records. Parents pounced on discrepancies. The secretary waved meeting minutes, but parents shouted back that things had been left out deliberately. Finally, I spoke. My voice cut through the noise. The Morrison Foundation's grant is meant to serve every student. Not just a chosen few. Not just the families who fit some picture-perfect mold. I've seen teachers paying out of pocket. Supplies locked away. Children left out because their parents don't measure up. That stops here. The room stilled. The president, desperate, tried one last play. Perhaps Lincoln Elementary isn't ready for such a large grant. Maybe a smaller amount would be more appropriate. The treasurer nodded furiously. The secretary echoed agreement. And that's when they finally overplayed their hand. Parents erupted in protest. They weren't going to let their children's future be shrunk down to preserve the PDA's control. Their outrage was louder than any staged applause the board had ever summoned. Catherine Fuller stood again. "I'm an accountant. I'll review their books pro bono." Others joined in, parents offering their professional skills. A coalition formed right there, raw and unshakable. The board's castle was crumbling. By the end, parents were demanding a special election for new leadership. The president sputtered about bylaws and term limits. The secretary scrambled for loopholes. The treasurer muttered about waiting periods. None of it mattered. The tide had turned. As the meeting broke up, parents stopped to shake my hand, to thank me, to share their own stories. Teachers gathered in the hallway, their eyes brighter, their voices stronger. The president and her loyalists huddled in a corner, whispering furiously. Their perfect facade cracked, but not yet shattered. They were already scheming. She re-emerged with her polished mask back in place, the treasurer and secretary at her sides. Their words were honeyed now: compromise, flexibility, perhaps we were too rigid. It was fake. Transparent. I refused. I walked toward the parking lot. Their voices followed, growing sharper, more desperate. The president leaned in, reminding me of her connections. The treasurer whispered about influence with other foundations. The secretary suggested reputations could be damaged. Their threats felt as empty as their promises. And I knew this fight wasn't over. That afternoon, Emma came home grinning, a smile I hadn't seen in days. She burst through the door, backpack bouncing, and told me some classmates had invited her to join their science project. Their parents, apparently, had decided the PDA's social ladder wasn't worth climbing anymore. The ripple effect had begun. Change was spreading, and it started with the kids. But the board wasn't done. Not even close. That evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Call after call. Email after email. Threats, bribes, guilt trips, they threw everything at me. The president left voicemails dripping with fake concern, reminding me to consider Emma's future at this school. The treasurer blasted my inbox with spreadsheets and PDFs, desperate attempts to explain away her numbers. And the secretary? She went nuclear, launching a full-on social media campaign painting me as some outsider bent on tearing apart their harmonious community. What they didn't realize was that I documented every word. Screenshots. Voicemails. Emails. I was building a case file that could bury them. Their panic only strengthened my hand. Every threat revealed who they really were. Every bribe exposed their corruption. And that shiny PR campaign? It backfired spectacularly. Parents began posting their own experiences. Stories of denied requests, exclusion, whispers, retaliation. The cracks in the board's control were spreading faster than they could patch them. Emma noticed my stress. She asked me, so softly it broke me, "Dad, did I cause this? Is it my fault you came to my school?" I hugged her tight. "No, baby. You did nothing wrong. Not one thing." But my chest ached. Because she still worried. And the fact that grown adults were willing to hurt children just to cling to power made my decision clear as glass. Lincoln Elementary didn't just need this grant. It needed new leadership. Late that night, an email popped up. From the vice president, the same one who'd blown the whistle with those hidden emails. She wanted to meet. She had more evidence. Things that would make sure the board never held positions of trust again. The rebellion inside their ranks was spreading. The next morning, I showed up half an hour early. The playground was empty except for her. She stood near the swings, a manila envelope clutched in her hands, eyes darting nervously. Dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept either. When she saw me, she didn't waste a second. She shoved the envelope into my hands and hurried toward the parking lot. Inside, bank statements, vendor invoices, emails dating back 2 years. And it was damning. The treasurer had been funneling contracts to her sister's office supply company at triple the normal cost. The secretary's husband ran the catering service, charging $500 for PDA meeting snacks. And the president? She'd been skimming from fundraisers. Small amounts each time, but over years it added up to thousands. The vice president had uncovered it months ago when asked to sign off on suspicious invoices. She'd collected evidence quietly, terrified to act alone. But now that the community was waking up, she was ready to burn it down. Before she left, she handed me a flash drive. Digital copies of everything. Then she drove away fast, like she couldn't afford to look back. I tucked the envelope and flash drive into my briefcase and walked inside. The office buzzed with energy I hadn't felt before. Parents were filling out volunteer forms. Teachers clustered in small groups, whispering plans. The air felt different, lighter, sharper. Determined. Matthews waved me into her office. 17 emails, she said, from parents overnight, all demanding PDA transparency. 3 teachers had already dusted off old grant proposals they'd been too afraid to submit. Mrs. Garcia had started cataloging her wish list of books. The school wasn't just reacting, it was mobilizing. And then enter the board. The president, treasurer, and secretary walked in dressed down, their designer armor swapped for humble mom costumes. The president carried a box of donuts, smiling at anyone who passed like she was hosting Sunday brunch. The treasurer beamed at every parent she saw, voice syrupy sweet. The secretary handed out compliments like coupons. Their charm offensive fooled no one. Parents took the donuts without slowing down. Teachers nodded politely, then turned away. You could feel the isolation setting in, their kingdom crumbling faster than they could patch the walls. At morning drop-off, I noticed Emma walking with a group of classmates instead of trailing alone. She waved at me, genuine joy on her face, before heading inside. That simple sight lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Still, a thought nagged at me. Catherine Fuller, the accountant mom, just happening to volunteer her skills for a financial review? Convenient. And the VP carrying evidence for 2 years, only now choosing to act? The timing was interesting. But whatever the motives, the walls were closing in on the board. Near the library, the president intercepted me. Her smile looked like it might crack under the strain. "We should work together," she said sweetly. "A partnership on the grant." The treasurer appeared with glossy mock-ups, maps of how funds could be distributed. The secretary had an entire timeline ready to go. Their desperation clung to them like perfume. I walked past without a word. Inside the library, Mrs. Garcia sat on the rug reading to kindergartners about butterflies. The kids leaned in, wide-eyed, hanging on every word. The book was so worn the tape barely held it together. That was reality. Not their flashy binders. Of course, the board followed me in, whispering promises about new books, better programs, sponsorships. It was noise. Catherine Fuller found me later during her volunteer shift, this time with backup. 5 other parents at her side. They'd spent the night combing through publicly available PDA records. They'd found discrepancies everywhere. Purchase orders that didn't match receipts. Fundraiser totals that didn't add up. Meeting minutes that contradicted themselves. The president overheard and panicked. She immediately called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon. The treasurer blasted emails about transparency. The secretary posted to the school social media about their commitment to communication. Their sudden openness reeked of a trap. I spent the morning in classrooms taking notes. 3rd grade kids sharing battered textbooks because there weren't enough copies. 4th graders running science experiments missing half the supplies because they were locked away. 5th graders watching their computers crash mid-project. Each stop hardened my resolve. Outside the music room, the treasurer cornered me again with her laptop. "Look, I've redone the budget projections," she said, voice high and frantic. She showed me numbers that only worked if you assumed free labor and endless donations. When I pointed it out, she revised them on the spot, again and again, each new version flimsier than the last. By lunch, the board launched another performance. They stationed themselves in the cafeteria, aprons on, wiping tables, opening juice boxes for kindergartners. The treasurer helped a kid with a spilled tray. The secretary handed out napkins like Oprah handing out cars. And yet, no one was fooled. Because in the middle of that cafeteria, Emma sat at a full table of friends. Laughing, trading snacks. A girl shared cookies and Emma gave her apple slices in return. The kids didn't need stage theatrics to understand kindness. They just lived it. Afterward, the president announced their emergency meeting would be open to all parents. A new era of transparency, she called it. The treasurer prepped slides. The secretary arranged chairs in the gym like it was opening night on Broadway. They were going all in. Betting everything on one final show. Meanwhile, teachers pulled me aside, quietly thanking me. Mrs. Fuller explained how she needed math manipulatives for hands-on lessons. Mr. Rodriguez wanted updated software for his special ed students. The PE teacher dreamed of equipment that wasn't held together with duct tape. Their requests were small, practical, selfless. Focused only on kids. And that made the PDA's glossy presentations look even emptier. The showdown was coming. That afternoon, the gymnasium was packed. Every chair taken, parents lining the walls, a low hum of anticipation hanging in the air. At the front, the PDA president stood at a podium they'd somehow conjured up overnight, looking every inch the concerned leader. The treasurer was at her side, laptop connected to a huge screen. The secretary floated through the aisles handing out neatly printed agendas with wording polished within an inch of its life. The president opened with an apology. Miscommunication, she called it, as if years of exclusion and corruption were just a poorly worded email. She talked about challenges and opportunities, tossing out corporate buzzwords so vague they could have been stolen from a Fortune 500 PowerPoint. The treasurer clicked through slides of budgets so convoluted they hid more than they revealed. The secretary read glowing testimonials from hand-picked parents like it was a church service. And then Catherine Fuller raised her hand. Calm, steady, accountant's confidence. She asked specific questions about the discrepancies her group had uncovered. The president dodged, promising future audits. The treasurer muttered about complex accounting complexities. The secretary chirped about forming a review committee. Their answers satisfied no one. Parents began standing. Voices rose. Why were supplies locked away? How were vendors chosen? Where did fundraiser money actually go? The board started unraveling in real time. The treasurer's laptop froze mid-presentation. The secretary dropped papers, scattering them across the floor. The president's smile curdled into a grimace. I stayed silent in the back. This wasn't my fight to lead anymore, it was the community's. And for the first time, parents who'd never dared speak out found their voices. Teachers stepped forward, telling their own stories. Years of frustration boiled to the surface. The tightly controlled narrative the board had maintained thread by thread came apart. Then the vice president rose. She held printed copies of the evidence she'd given me, the bank statements, the invoices, the emails. She passed them into the crowd. Parents gasped, reading with wide eyes. The president lunged, trying to snatch them back. Confidential, she shouted. The treasurer threatened legal action. The secretary screamed for security that didn't exist. That's when Principal Matthews stepped up. She didn't shout. She didn't posture. She just took the mic and let her authority fill the room. Given the serious concerns raised, the district will be conducting a full audit of PDA finances. The president went pale. The treasurer slammed her laptop shut with shaking hands. The secretary sank into her chair like the air had been punched out of her. Parents erupted, calling for new elections. The president tried to cling to bylaws. The treasurer babbled about notification requirements. The secretary clutched a binder of rules like it was a life raft. But then a father stood. Calm, firm. He was a lawyer. He explained that emergency elections were absolutely permitted under these circumstances. Financial mismanagement more than qualified. Other parents with legal backgrounds backed him up. The board looked at one another, panic written across their faces. Their last defenses were gone. The meeting ended with a vote. Special elections in 2 weeks. The current board suspended pending the audit. Parent volunteers would step in to keep things running. The president stormed out without a word, heels cracking across the gym floor like gunshots. The treasurer and secretary scurried behind her, heads down. As the gym emptied, Emma's class came filing out. She spotted me and ran over, holding up a butterfly she'd made, colorful tissue paper wings glued with pride. Her teacher had dug the supplies out of her personal stash to make it happen. My throat tightened as she beamed up at me. Other parents approached, shaking my hand, sharing their stories, exchanging numbers, already forming committees. The community was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. That evening, silence. No angry voicemails. No manipulative emails. The board had gone dark. Their catering contracts, their inflated supply deals, their skimmed fundraiser money, all of it was about to be dragged into the light. Emma chattered happily at dinner. She'd played at recess. She'd been picked for a project group. Her teacher had praised her work. Ordinary childhood moments, things she'd been denied because of adult politics, were hers again. I sat down that night and wrote my report to the Morrison Foundation. Lincoln Elementary would get the full grant, but with strict oversight. The money would flow straight into classrooms, to teachers and students, not into the black hole of the PDA's vanity projects. The next morning, Matthews called. More board members were stepping down from their leadership roles. Their influence was evaporating. Parents were done enabling them. Emma slept peacefully that night, no longer worrying about lunchboxes or socks. I sat by her bed, watching her chest rise and fall, thinking about how close she'd come to being scarred by the pettiness of adults who thought power mattered more than children. The real victory wasn't just the grant. It was the community finding its voice. The next day, the treasurer resigned, citing personal reasons. By lunch, the secretary followed. Only the president clung to her title, alone in an empty conference room, her kingdom reduced to dust. 2 weeks later, the gym was filled again, this time for elections. Parents voted in new leadership, diverse, transparent, focused on kids instead of cliques. Catherine Fuller became treasurer, her accounting expertise restoring credibility. The other positions filled with volunteers bringing real skills and open hearts. The president didn't even show up. And just like that, Emma's world transformed. No more whispered judgments about her socks. No more photos of her sandwiches. Her honey buns became a hot trade at lunch. Her mismatched socks? A trend other kids copied. The grant money arrived within weeks. New computers. Updated textbooks. Science kits unboxed like Christmas morning. The library finally stocked with current books. That locked closet? Emptied, supplies distributed freely to whoever needed them. 6 months later, Lincoln Elementary's test scores had soared. Teacher retention was the highest in years. Parent involvement tripled. The school became a model for what happens when resources go where they belong, into the hands of kids. Emma thrived. Her kindness, once mocked, now celebrated. Her socks still mismatched. Her laughter louder than ever. And those board members? They faded into irrelevance. The president enrolled her kids in private school. The treasurer found a new circle to control. The secretary took her talents elsewhere. Their reign ended not with glory but with silence. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with mismatched socks and a child finally feeling like she belongs. Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.